Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the spiritual, a brand new, Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our brand new spiritual practice series. I'm Susanna Wupong Calvert, and I am so excited to be here tonight with all of you for the very first session of our new series. I'm here representing both the Richmond IONS organization as a board member and also as a founding member of the brand new Sanctuary of Earth organization, which I'll tell you more about in a minute. The goal of this spiritual practice speaker series is to begin the conversation in bridging the theoretical, empirical, and philosophical aspects of spirituality with people's lived experience in those areas, in spirituality and consciousness. We're going to be having speakers from a variety of practices and beliefs to offer listeners a range of options to promote individualization of our unique interface with the divine. It's the perfect partnership with the Richmond IONS community group, which focuses on the science of spirituality, and this series will provide a complementary counterpoint by focusing on the practice. We will be meeting by Zoom the first Wednesdays of the month at 7 p.m. Eastern Time going forward. And we're so delighted that Rohini Ross is here to be our first speaker. Like Richmond IONS, we will be relying on donations to operate. So we'd very much appreciate a donation if you can afford it of any amount. And we suggest a minimum of $10 to help us offset the expenses of these programs and even grow. You can see the link for the donation on the slide in front of you. It's sanctuaryoferarth.org/donate. As I mentioned, the Sanctuary Earth is partnering with the Richmond IONS community group to offer this program. And it just has felt like such a long time in coming to commence really the first Sanctuary of Earth event tonight. So I'm just really excited and grateful to all of the folks who have participated in getting us to this point, and all of you for also attending. So you're probably wondering, what is Sanctuary of Earth? Well, we're a brand new organization. We were just incorporated earlier this year, but we have had regular meetings since September of 2021. I had to look back to see how long it was that we started meeting. And it included a group of several of us who are here in Richmond, which include me and Tom Coates, who I think probably most of you know. Ryan Chappell and Gary Goldberg, and also our wonderful counterparts from Bend, Oregon, who are part of the Light Path Educational Center, who are here, Lawrence Schechter, Joy Belangi, and Mel Siegel. So grateful to the whole team who have been helping make this vision a reality in the 3D. Our mission of the Sanctuary of Earth is to actualize human spiritual potential on Earth and for Earth by providing the bridge between the cognitive and empirical to the lived, embodied, grounded, and practical. We see the world as a heavenly reality where peace, justice, harmony, care, and balance are available to humanity and all of Earth. This is our first initiative, but we plan on also creating at some point a beautiful and interactive online skill development modules for spiritual practice and the science of spirituality. It'll happen in divine timing, so stay tuned, but do not hold your breath. I know it'll happen when and how it is meant to be. But in the meantime, we are so grateful to be here with all of you on what feels like a momentous occasion to me, since Sanctuary of Earth has been a long time coming and percolating in my mind, and it's unbelievably gratifying to me that we are starting here tonight with all of you beautiful souls. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Joy to introduce our speaker. We're going to have about an hour for her presentation, and we'll leave the rest of the time for discussion and Q&A. So Joy, it's all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Susanna. I am just so delighted to have you all meet Rohini Ross. She is somebody that is near and dear to my heart. I did a deep dive with her several years ago in a rewilding program. And so when we were launching this speaker series, she's the first one that came to my mind. And so she is a global leader in this understanding that I've been learning about for, I guess, 2 decades now. As the understanding that we know that is called 3 principles based on Sydney Banks' work. And she and her husband, Angus, are also co-founders of what's called the Rewilders and a podcast called Rewilding Love, which she'll be speaking about tonight. So I've so enjoyed learning from Rohini and her incredible, amazing wisdom. And I just know that you'll enjoy hearing her also. And so without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to you, Rohini. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Joy, for that introduction. And Susanna, thank you so much for sharing more about the Sanctuary of the Earth and what the vision is for your organization. It sounds very beautiful and aligned with everything that feels important to me in the work that I do. So it's so nice to be here, and it's great to be here with all of you as well today. Can't actually see everyone. Is the slide going to be? Oh, there we go. All right. So yeah, now I can see who's here. So as I was saying, it's lovely to be here with you, and I'm looking forward to spending this time together. And as Susanna said, there'll be time for sharing, time for Q&A. Also during that time, I would love there to be opportunities for you to share your wisdom and what's in your heart and what's important to you, and as we all look in this direction together. And also, I'm absolutely fine if you want to ask questions along the way. I think Joy said you would be looking at the chat if anybody wants to put a question in the chat. I might miss it as I'm speaking, but Joy will help me with that. And would like it to be as interactive as possible, because ultimately this wisdom that we're all pointing to is inside of ourselves, and it's our opportunity to listen deeply to that space within. So even though I'm sharing with you, I'm pointing in a direction to that space within yourself so that you can hear that more deeply and feel into that and have a sense of what your lived experience is with that. And so for today, the topic is rewilding love. And I thought that I would share a little bit about what I mean by the terms rewilding, because we're using it in a metaphorical sense, not in a literal sense. And the term love, because there's a lot of meanings that we can put on that word. And so I just want to be clear that it's not just referring to the romantic love that it's often associated with, that when I'm talking about rewilding love, I'm talking about rewilding that impersonal love that is within each one of us. And there are many words that can be used to refer to that space. That's just the term that is being used tonight. So feel free to plug in whatever word works for you. And then I'll be looking at how this does apply in the area of relationships and what practical implications and ramifications there are for relationships in our lives when we're looking at rewilding that love within us, and what happens when we do that. But it's not to say that that's the only area of our life that is impacted by that. Everything is impacted by us connecting more deeply with the truth of who we are and feeling that on an experiential level. And I'm open to whatever questions come forward. If you have curiosities, I may not have the answer to them, but I really want you to feel free to ask whatever's on your mind, and I'll do my best to share in a way that's hopefully supportive and relevant. Okay. So in terms of rewilding, the term is used often related to the environment, and it points to how nature can be rewilded back to its natural state. And there's lots of examples of this, but one of the examples that was the first that came to Angus, my partner, and my attention was the experience of rewilding in Yellowstone Park when they reintroduced a pack of wolves to the park. And the wolves had been absent for many years. And they knew that the scientists knew that they wanted to reintroduce this species that had been there naturally, but they didn't realize the implications that would have on the environment. And there's a video on YouTube. It's called, what is it called? How Wolves Change Rivers. And it talks about the rewilding of Yellowstone Park with the reintroduction of the wolves. And the title, How Wolves Change Rivers, is indicative of how they change the environment in an unexpected way. They didn't think that by introducing this pack of wolves that the flow of the rivers in the park were actually going to change. There were so many ramifications that couldn't have been predicted by the models. And what happened is when the wolves were introduced to the park, yes, they did kill some of the animals. That's had some of the impact, but the bigger impact was that the deer that were grazing shifted where they grazed. And so they stopped grazing in the open valleys and they shifted their grazing to other parts of the park. And what happened is that allowed trees to grow back that hadn't been able to grow because they'd been eaten. And as those trees started to grow back and get stronger and bigger, birds started to come back. And as the trees got bigger, the beavers were able to use the wood to build dams in a way that they hadn't been able to do that. And as the trees grew, the earth shifted in terms of there wasn't the subsidence that had been there previously. And so all of this cascade of effects ended up with the actual course of the river shifting in Yellowstone Park. And so when we're looking at the power of rewilding in nature, we can see how there's so many implications that come forward from that can't be predicted. And I would say that I'm using this term metaphorically for how we can be rewilded by the love and by our true nature that is who we are. And that in that experience of allowing ourselves to be rewilded by that space within us, we don't know what the ramifications are going to be in our life. And we don't need to know. We might have ideas, we might have hopes, we might have dreams about where that's going to go. But what's important is just to simply allow ourselves to connect more deeply with that space and to respect that space so that we can then allow the unfolding of rewilding in our own lives in the way that shows up that's optimal for us. And I think one of the things that is so helpful is to be able to trust that life force within us. And I think that we can often use the natural environment as a way to see that life force in action. So for example, the rewilding of Yellowstone Park, another example is how nature has reclaimed so much of the city of Chernobyl that was devastated by the impact of the nuclear event there, and to see the power and the force of nature to come back in its vibrancy and its aliveness, and to recognize that we aren't separate from nature. We are nature, and that life force is within us, and that we can tune into and respect that life force and be in relationship with it and really look to how that wants to express in our lives, how that deeper feeling within us wants to show up. And so in order to allow that fullest expression of our potential, Angus and I use the term rewilding so that we can be rewilded back to our natural state. And our natural state is one that is not limited by the misunderstandings that we take on in life through conditioning, through learning that makes us put meaning together in the best way that we can, but isn't necessarily the most accurate understanding. And so that misunderstanding can look like, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. Who am I to share my talents with this world. There's so many layers of conditioning that we innocently take on that we would say is part of the taming of ourselves, that isn't really allowing the wildness of our true nature to be expressed fully. And so we'll be looking a little bit more later on about what does that mean to be rewilded, but that's the metaphor that I'm using. And seeing how rewilding shows up in nature, I think, is helpful to look at the power of the rewilding that can happen within ourselves. And we're looking at being rewilded by that intelligence within us, by that deeper knowing within us, that we all have some familiarity with in some way. And so that will bring me to the love portion of Rewilding Love. And so that's the term that I'm using to point to that space of deeper feeling, deeper knowing, the mystery. Really, nobody can know it fully or understand it intellectually, but we all have a sense of what it feels like when we drop out of our conceptual mind and we drop into that deeper feeling within ourselves. And I think we all have reference points for that. And there's not just a feeling in that space. There's also wisdom in that space. There's fresh thinking that comes forward when we're connected with that space within ourselves that isn't the ruminations and the conditioning of our mind, that is really something that's fresh and responsive in this moment. And there's all kinds of ways that we can look at the intelligence and how we know without really knowing what we know. And there's a book called No Self, No Problem. Chris Neibauer, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce his last name. And it's about how neuroscience is catching up with Buddhism. And there's a couple of examples in that book that I really love. One of them is about studies that were done researching dogs and how dogs seem to know that their owners were coming home. And so they set up the research in such a way where they could eliminate variables like the dog recognizing the sound of the owner's car or other things that might tip the dog off. And what they noticed was that this dog started to recognize the owners were coming home when the owners started to think about leaving for home. And it's like, how do they know? What is that deeper knowing? The intellect can't explain it. And the other example, which I love, is about cats, and I love cats. And so they did a study with vets and veterinary practices. And one of the challenges with veterinary practices is that the appointments with cats would be really problematic because the owners would be constantly canceling their appointments because they couldn't find their cat to take their cat to the vet. And so they did this study, I think it was with 70 vet practices, and they were able to see that there was this strange phenomenon that was statistically significant where cat appointments would go missed because somehow the cats would know that they were on the way to see the vet and they would just go missing. And one practice decided not to schedule cat appointments anymore. I hope that they didn't not see cats anymore. They just decided to just take walk-in cat appointments. But there's this way of knowing that we can explain by the intellect. And another one that comes to mind is with birds and their migratory patterns, and that birds will shift the timing of their migration so that they avoid the hurricanes, so that they avoid the bad weather. Now, there's a saying, bird brain, meaning that they don't have a very big brain. So clearly, this is not something that's coming from their intellectual sense of knowing. There's a deeper understanding that's available that animals are in tune with in a way that humans tend to not respect that kind of knowing in the same way, because we have a incredible intellectual mind that is able to explore and understand so much, and it's valuable. But there's also another kind of knowing that we can't really explain, that is an evident part of who we are, that we can respect and step into. And so this rewilding, being rewilded by love, it's that impersonal place within us, that impersonal state of love that's not about romantic relationship. It's about a feeling of love that's deeper than that. That's deeper than our feelings that go up and down, and deeper than our thoughts that come and go. There's that space within us that I said that we all have a reference point. And I would just encourage each one of you now to just connect with your own reference point for that space within yourself, and to feel into it, and to allow yourself to recognize it. And, you know, it might be a very ordinary moment of seeing a beautiful sunset, where we drop out of our conceptual mind and drop into that deeper feeling of awe and wonder and well-being within ourselves, and we feel our hearts open. It might be the birth of a child at a wedding. It could be in one of our most challenging moments, that all of a sudden we drop out of our thinking and drop into a space of surrender, and we have a moment of grace. And I know one of those examples that comes to mind in this moment for me was, you know, when I was in my 20s, and Angus and I were traveling back and forth from London and the US, and I was on a working visa at that time. And it was fairly common. Angus is a white male. I'm, you know, brown. And it was fairly common for me to have extra scrutiny come my way whenever we were going through customs and immigration. And so that was just something that we would kind of laugh about. And he would sail through, and I would, you know, get pulled over and checked out more thoroughly. But this time I had flown back to London. I think it was fairly last minute. And what had happened is my Canadian passport had expired. But that wasn't a problem in my mind, because I had dual citizenship and I had my British passport that wasn't expired. And so I had my visa and I had my British passport, and I went to London and we did our trip and we're coming back. But it turns out that in this situation coming back, the passport with the paper visa in my hand wasn't acceptable. With the British passport, it needed to be stamped in, which was different than a Canadian passport that I didn't know. But rather than it being something that could be addressed logistically in the moment, they basically told me that I was being denied entry to the country and that I was going to be deported. And not only was I going to be deported, I was going to be detained overnight, and I guess in a jail, what they call a jail, and then deported. And they wouldn't let me speak to Angus, my husband, who had been let through and was now waiting for me on the other side. And I think somebody must have told him they weren't letting me in, but they wouldn't let me communicate with him. And so this, at that age, I mean, maybe I might have had more perspective about this now, but at that age, it felt like my world was falling apart. They were telling me that I may not ever be able to come back into the United States again, because I was coming in illegally in their mind. And so I was just, you know, really in a lot of distress. And then when I got taken to the detention facility at the airport, I asked to call my husband and let him know that I was safe. And they said that I wasn't allowed to call him. And so something inside of me said, well, can I at least call my attorney? And so they did let me call him. But then I'm back in the room and I'm, you know, it's the nighttime. I'm being deported the next day. I'm in floods of tears. I just feel like it's the end of the world. And at some point, it occurred to me that I just needed to ask for assistance within myself. And so what I turned to was prayer in that moment. And it wasn't any formal religious prayer. It was just a prayer of support there. I looked to something greater than myself, because I wasn't feeling like I was doing a very good job coping by myself in that moment. And what I remember from that experience is that within a fairly short period of time, from being incredibly distraught, I just felt a peace come over me. And nothing had changed in my circumstance. I was still being deported. I still didn't know if I was ever going to be allowed back into the country. I didn't know when I was going to see my husband again. None of that had changed. But I felt this incredible sense of peace within me, so much so that I just went to sleep. I was able to let go of all of the worried thinking that I was having. My nervous system settled down, and I just tapped into that space of love and peace and well-being within myself. in an INS jail on LAX property, not knowing what was going to happen the next day. And this moment really stands out to me as one of those pivotal moments, because everything changed within me through connecting with that space within myself, even though nothing had changed outside of me. And I think that was one of the first times that I really had that sense of how my experience was coming from inside of me, not coming from the circumstances that I was in, because the circumstances were still the same and I did not like the circumstances. And so there was a fairly happy ending for that story. The main point, though, that I wanted to make was that shift that happened within myself by allowing myself to drop into that space. But I will give you the ending to the story, so I'm not leaving you on tenterhooks there. And so what happened was I had made that call to my attorney, and I was in floods of tears when I was talking to him. And I was just saying, please, please call Angus and tell him I'm okay. And I think he just felt so badly that this was happening, and that I was so emotional and distraught. And what happened was he managed to speak with someone in immigration at the airport. And he said, I'm not even calling as an attorney. I'm just calling as a person who cares. I'm calling as a friend. And she has her visa. She's made a mistake. She acknowledges that she's made a mistake. She just didn't know. Can you please recognize that the visa is valid and do what you need to do to acknowledge the mistake that she's made? So anyway, I didn't know that any of this was happening. And the next morning, not just one guard came to my door, but all of the guards came to the door. It was basically like some kind of motel that we were staying in, and there was numerous people there. And I'm looking at all of these guards, and they've got these very stern faces, and I'm looking and thinking, like, what else can happen now? Like, I'm already being deported. What else are they going to tell me now? Because clearly something now is really wrong. And so they look at me and they started to say something in sort of not a very nice tone. And then they just all burst out laughing. I'm like, what are you laughing about? And what was so interesting to me is that they were so excited because I was going to be released, and that they have never seen anyone be released. And so I recognize my privilege in being able to call an attorney and have that support. And I know that so many people haven't had that benefit as part of that experience. And so I want to acknowledge the privilege that I had that support, and that they actually were teasing me about the fact that they were going to let me go. And they basically took me into LAX, and I paid a fine, and Angus was able to pick me up. But again, to go back to the point of that story, why it occurred to me to share now is it's to illustrate the power of being able to open up to that space within ourselves. And all spiritual traditions and religions point in that direction. For thousands of years, and indigenous cultures have been looking in the direction of the capacity that we have as human beings to drop into that space within ourselves that is beyond our personal mind, that is beyond our concepts, that we may not be able to understand, but we can experience it, and it's real. And that when we experience that space within ourselves, we are resourced by that. We are rewilded by that. Now, I'm not saying that that is what caused me to get out of LAX, but that gave me the resources to handle whatever was going to happen in that experience. I knew that I was going to be fine, even if I was put on a plane back to London that day and denied entry to the US for the rest of my life, or whatever it was, that would have been okay. And that doesn't just apply to that situation, it applies to every situation. And that what happens, and I know this happens for me in my day-to-day life, is that I forget about resourcing myself from that space within me. I listen to my worry. I listen to the habitual thoughts of my intellect. I get caught up in my conditioning and my misunderstandings and my limiting beliefs. And I live in the feeling of that. And then I remember that that isn't true, that that is the illusion that we all live in, that we all feel, but there's a deeper space within myself that is fresh and new in each moment. And really, it's a dropping into the present moment. That's another way of talking about this, that we all have the capacity to drop into the present moment and to meet ourselves there and to open to our experience. And this is another reason that I like the term rewilding and the metaphor of rewilding, because so often in spiritual conversations, there's this idea that we transcend our human experience. There's an idea that we are doing well when we're in a beautiful feeling and in a Zen state of mind. And I used this against myself for many years. And I started doing yoga in my early 20s, started doing yoga and meditation at that point in my life. And it helped me in many ways. I loved the practice. It opened me up to spirituality in a way that I hadn't been exposed to when I was growing up. And it was deeply healing. But what happened was my interest in spiritual understanding got co-opted by my ego's conditioning innocently. I didn't do this on purpose. And the way that it got co-opted is that I started to use it against me, started to let my pattern of perfectionism, let my ideas about self-improvement contaminate the direction that I was looking in. And so what happened was I felt like I needed to improve myself in order to get somewhere with my spiritual practice, and that it was through me working on myself and improving myself that I would have deeper spiritual understanding, better spiritual experiences. And so rather than simply dropping out of my concepts and being in that space, I started to then get busy working on myself and getting into all kinds of techniques and practices that there was nothing wrong with the techniques and practices, but the way that I was using them was as if I wasn't good enough as I was in that moment. And I didn't see the pressure that I was putting on myself. And it felt like this is just what I needed to do in order to continue on my path. And that it was about not being rewilded and being open to the full range of human experience. It was about sanitizing my human experience, that somehow deeper spiritual understanding would offer me a more sanitized, more preferable human experience. And so I put a lot of energy into trying to not have certain feelings, trying to not have certain experiences because I didn't want to have them, and trying to have more of the nice experiences that I wanted to have. And so where this all came to a head for me was I was working at the time in a job where I was required to do a lot of talks, not on Zoom, in person. It wouldn't have mattered though if it had been on Zoom or in person, I still would have felt as anxious at that time. And I was so gripped by my insecure thinking. And the requirements of the job brought me up against my insecurities constantly. And it felt really unbearable. It felt like I was suffering. I would suffer before I would do a presentation. I would suffer during the presentation. And you would think that maybe after it was done, then I would stop suffering. But no, I would keep suffering after the presentation, because then I would be caught up in all of my insecure thinking about how bad I was, how it didn't go well, how I should have done better. And so there's pretty much nonstop suffering before, during, and after. And this was something I was having to do on a consistent basis. It wasn't like I was doing one talk a year. It was like I was doing a couple talks a month. And so I had the opportunity to have an intensive experience with a practitioner. Joy mentioned the 3 principles with a practitioner of the 3 principles. And I thought, great, I'm going to do this intensive, and this is what I'm going to look at. I'm going to go to this intensive so that I can get free from my insecurity, because that is what spiritual understanding is going to do for me. It is going to give me a more comfortable life that has less insecurity or no insecurity in it. And this person is enlightened enough for me to do that. And so that's how I went to this intensive. And when they asked me when I got there, what was I looking for? I didn't say it necessarily in that way, but pretty much basically saying I'm suffering from insecurity and I want you to help me get rid of the insecure feelings that I'm having. And what was so mind-blowing for me at the time, and I think amusing for the practitioner who was working with me, is that they could see how my searching for less insecurity and my resistance to the experience of insecurity was really causing me way more problems than the actual experience of insecurity itself. And what I heard in that experience, and what was so impactful for me, was that there was nothing wrong with me that I had insecurity. The only thing that was really problematic is that I was judging myself as unworthy and not good enough because I was having that experience in life. That was really the source of my suffering, not the experience of anxiety. The self-judgment was what was robbing me of my well-being. And that was completely invisible to me. I did not see how that was fueling me and how that was fueling my behaviors. And it was even fueling my intention behind going to that retreat experience to get myself free from insecurity. Why? Because I wanted to be worthy. And I felt like I wasn't worthy because of my emotional experience. I used my emotional experience as a way to judge myself as not good enough. And I had been doing that for most of my life, finding ways to judge myself as unworthy and not measuring up, finding evidence, and suffering greatly from the effects of believing that, but never questioning where the source of the suffering was really coming from. And so in that moment, what I saw was that, oh my goodness, I can take all of the weight off of me because there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not good enough. That's just not true. And that's not true for any of us. It's not true for any of us. And that, what am I left with? I'm left with being a human, having a human experience, having moods that go up and down, having emotions that come and go. That's what we all have. And I hadn't been seeing that. I hadn't been seeing that I was a normal, healthy human with all of that going on. I had been having a normal, healthy human experience and judging myself as not worthy. And so in that freedom, it didn't make the insecurity go away right away. It has, over the years, definitely dissipated significantly. In fact, I was thinking before coming on to speak with all of you, how excited I felt and how grateful I felt to be here and how little nervousness I had, and was very grateful for that. But at the beginning, that's not what it was. So after that experience, I went and did my next talk, and I had the same sensations. I had the dry mouth. I had the sweaty palms. I had the butterflies in my stomach. I had the sweaty armpits. Like, all of the experiences of anxiety were present. You could call it excitement, but I was experiencing it as anxiety in that moment. But everything was different because I could be with that experience and not judge myself because I was having that experience. And that is what changed everything. Because when I was simply having the experience without judgment, the experience moved through me, and I didn't keep the anxiety and the insecurity going through the self-judgment. And what happened, because I wasn't judging myself, is that it allowed me to be present so I could feel the feelings, and they actually weren't that bad. Maybe it's a little uncomfortable, but they're not that bad. Certainly a lot less painful than the shame of the self-judgment that I previously was experiencing. And in the lack of discomfort with my emotional experience and my understanding that it was normal and healthy and that there was nothing wrong with me, I actually got to be present, not just present with myself, but present with who I was sharing with, and able to connect and able to feel and be guided more by that intuitive place inside of myself. And so that, to me, showed me that I thought that freedom came from not having emotional suffering. But what it showed me was something far more valuable, far more liberating, and I think far more in alignment with the term rewilding, which is the freedom and the liberation is not being free from certain experiences the way that I thought it was. It was free to be with any experience, any of my human experience, and to know that I was fundamentally safe, and it fundamentally didn't mean anything about me, that it couldn't make me unworthy. And that was the freedom that I had really been looking for and I didn't know. And so in this rewilding journey, it is not about sanitizing the human experience. It is about all of us seeing that we have the capacity to be with the full range of our human experience. And it's through opening to our experience and being in the aliveness of our experience that we have a deeper connection with our true nature that is beyond our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. That it is a doorway that we can walk through and open to the fullness of who we are by not resisting what is. I mean, the simplicity of just being present. Like what that person said to me in that intensive was very ordinary. She basically said, Rohini, you're like everybody else. There's nothing wrong with you. Everybody has these experiences. So what? And for me, in that moment, that was revolutionary because I had thought a big so what? I had thought, oh no, that means this, this, and this about me. And we all have these misunderstandings, maybe not exactly the same way that I have that misunderstanding, but we all have these misunderstandings that we make up as part of our life experience that have us feel restricted, constrained, not free. And that it is in being open to that deeper space within ourselves that we wake up from the misunderstandings and that we see that they're not true. Now, the timing of that, I can't predict. You know, it's like if there was a magic button of 1, 2, 3, do this, and that will happen, I promise you, I would tell you that. But I don't have that. But what I do have is the lived experience of recognizing that when I started to respect that space of love within myself, of impersonal love within myself, that I became more and more rewilded by that. And that the effects on my life are kind of like the effects of those wolves in Yellowstone Park, where they didn't know that the wolves were going to change rivers. I had no idea what the impact of that was going to be in my life. I was happy with just a little bit, you know, with less anxiety. That would have been great for me. But not only did I end up feeling less anxiety in my life, but I ended up being more open to the creative ideas that came my way. And at that point in time, I was working as a therapist. I was working for a behavioral health company, and I had a small therapy practice on the side. And I thought that was, you know, that was great. I wanted to feel less burnt out, but that was sort of what I thought I needed to do with my life. And then as I started to listen more deeply and open to that space within myself, more ideas came forward. And I had the willingness to listen and to follow. And so for me, the invitation for all of you is to respect that space within yourself, whatever you call that space. I'm calling it that space of love, that space of peace, that space of well-being, that space of wisdom, that space of divinity, that space that you know, whatever your reference points are for that space, to respect it and to allow yourself to be in relationship with it and to be rewilded by it. And it will often have us come up against the edge of our comfort zone. So it can have us have to confront our fears. I've had plenty of ideas where I'm like, oh, really? I'm supposed to do that? Who am I to do that? I'm like, okay, let's see. I'll take the first step and see what happens. But I respected the feeling of inspiration more than my feeling of fear and my feeling of self-consciousness. I respected that space and was guided by that space and wanted to be led by that space within me and that deeper knowing, the kind of knowing that tells birds when they should migrate, the kind of knowing that lets cats know when to go hide because they don't want to go to the vets, the kind of knowing that dogs understand their owner is thinking about them and planning on coming home. I don't understand that knowing, but I know that we are all part of that knowing, that that is who we are, that we are an expression of that divine source, and that we are these beautiful, unique, magnificent emanations. And in our uniqueness, that does not take away the oneness that is behind all of that. And that in that space of oneness, we can be resourced, we can be healed, we can be transformed in our own ways. And that there's no one way to do that, that we find our way. We're drawn to whatever spiritual practice, whatever religion, whatever spiritual teachings, whatever recreational practices that we do, we can listen to that deeper part of ourselves and let us be guided by that so that we know our next steps. And in my work with clients, whether I'm working in a training, whether I'm working one-on-one, whether Angus and I are doing a couples intensive, that work is always pointing to that space of wisdom that is within each one of us, that we have our answers, that we have our inner guide and inner teacher, and that we can trust that space within ourselves. And I know so many times people have references for that point within themselves, that space within themselves. They'll know it. You know, I was having a conversation recently with someone, they could reference that space, but yet they didn't trust it. It felt too scary to trust. And I can have compassion for that. I can understand that and relate to that. But the invitation is to lean in experientially. And I love that this is a practical spiritual series, because we have to lean in. We are in this amazing vessel of a human body, and we are in this world of form. And so we get to explore and lean in through our lived experience, and that we can dip our toe in and test the waters and see what the invitation is and listen deeply within ourselves. I'm someone that likes to dive in. I don't really like dipping my toe in, but plenty of people like to dip their toe in, and that's fine too. It's at whatever pace, it's at whatever capacity you're willing to trust into that mystery of the unknown that is known in some way, that is real in some way, that you can recognize the intangible that is tangible. And there's a quote that Angus, my husband, says all of the time. And it's funny, it's coming to mind for me to say now, but it's a quote that's attributed to Einstein. I don't know if, there's some perhaps question on whether he said it exactly this way. But the quote is, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a willing servant. But we've created a society that worships the servant and has forgotten the gift." And so for me, rewilding is about remembering the gift. It is about remembering that deeper intuitive space within us so that we can be rewilded by that. And then we get to see the ripple effects in our lives. Now, I was going to share about relationships as well, but I know I've been speaking for quite a long time. So I want to check in and see if there's any questions or any reflections. Like I said, I'm open to hearing your wisdom and value us coming together and sharing in wisdom. So I'm here in service to all of you in whatever way would be supportive. But I'll do a check-in now and see if there's any questions or reflections, and then see where it goes from there. And I'm happy to answer any relationship questions too, in terms of how this applies to relationships. And I'm happy to continue if there aren't, but I'll give you some time, because sometimes it takes people a moment before they're really comfortable saying anything. Yes. Oh, Mel, you got your hand raised. Oh, your audio is muted. Are you able to unmute your audio?
How's that? There's another theory that I've seen about how the dogs know when their owners are about to come home. And I wonder if you think it makes sense and whether you'll comment on it. And that is, it really works when the owners work regular hours and kind of come and go. But the dogs can't tell time, but the owners leave and their smell dissipates, their odor dissipates, and then it gets down to a certain level that, it's been 8 hours, and when it gets down to that level, the owners are coming home soon.
That's
What do
very
you think
cool.
about that?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I do think, and I can't remember the exact study, but I think they did factor that in though, with that study, that it wasn't just regular schedules. They did intermittent schedule. But I'm sure that's true for dogs, because they have amazing sense of smell. So that's probably part of the way they know.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mel. That's very cool. I didn't even think about that. Susanna.
Rohini, that was just such a lovely treatment and description of what we on some level know to be true, but often don't recognize it or can't articulate it, or and so thank you for bringing such an important message to all of us in such a beautiful, clear, and insightful way. I loved your stories about the creatures just knowing who they are and doing what they do. And my belief, and I just wanted to see what your reaction to this was, is that part of the importance of us accessing that deep space is not just to remember how we are human and what that our true nature of being human is, and not the distorted one that we have in our head, but also like, I don't know if this is true, but I feel like we're somewhat unique from most animals, but that's probably just anthropocentrism. But that we have a unique role and purpose for our life on Earth. And so in addition to just being human, but we have a specific role that we're here to play. A way of being in service that's unique for each of us, our calling, if you will, or our authentic purpose, as I like to say more to the lay audiences, and that by accessing that deep space, that we can really be in touch with what that purpose is and how to live it and be of service in the way we were born to be. So I just wanted to see if that resonated with you, and if it did, I guess just add it to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you for adding that to the conversation. That resonates deeply. I think it's a Greek term, but it's a term entelechy, and I don't have the exact definition, but it can be used in the way that the entelechy of an acorn is to become an oak tree. And so we all have that entelechy within us to live into the highest, fullest expression of who we are, whatever our expression of that oak tree might be. And so I think that when we tap into that space, the way that you're saying, that there is an ability to hear the inner prompts and hear the inner guidance in a way that allows us to live into our potential and to open to what's possible for us. Because so often the intellect forgets what's possible and lives in the misunderstandings that have us try to keep safe, and that our true potential is far greater than that. And so I absolutely agree with what you said, and love that you brought that into the conversation, that we can really deepen in that knowing of what wants to get expressed through us while we're here. Thank you. Yeah, I see some hands raised. Who was that? Was it Gary next? And then Tom? Oh, Tom?
Yeah. Yeah, Tom. Rohini, a pleasure to make your acquaintance over the screen here. And I think your way of expressing this is absolutely wonderful. It is something that I think almost anyone can identify with, unless they're so totally immersed in their ego rational mind that they've lost sight of everything else, which of course is the way our society directs us to be as much as you can. The person you were trying to think about the dogs was Rupert Sheldrake.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And of course, we, in terms of cause and effect, we like to think of things from the standpoint of our rational analyses, that being straight line cause and effect, when in fact, as your talk illustrates very well, everything is a multiplex. You know, it's a multiple dimensions, multiple streams of input coming and going, and things are way too complex, even at the level of something like Yellowstone and putting wolves back in there, that for us to really parse it in a straight line intellectual way.
Mm-hmm.
And or even discuss it intelligently for the most.
Mm-hmm.
There's something else I had in mind to comment on, but I can't remember what it is, and I'm losing my train of thought.
That's all right. If it comes back, you can let us know. Yeah.
But I you really do have a special gift for expressing this stuff. I can't say.
Thank you. That's very kind. You know, you made me think about another example. Angus always comes up with these examples, usually from things he finds on YouTube or somewhere. So I love that he's a resource for me. But it was about the Tokyo subway system, where researchers took a map of the Tokyo subway system, and they put food, I think it was for slime mold, some kind of fungus. They put food for this fungus at each station along the Tokyo subway system. And then they introduced the fungus to it. And initially the fungus was just searching for food and finding the food. But within 26 hours, it had organized itself in a way that was far more efficient than the original map of the Tokyo subway system as a way to navigate itself between all those pieces of food that were the subway stations. And so I think that's exactly what you're pointing to. Like, that is not the rational mind going from A to B. There's a deeper intelligence that is unfolding that we can't understand, but that we can see demonstrated to us in so many ways. And it seems to be far greater than our intellect. And not that the intellect isn't useful and important, but to open to that deeper intelligence and have the intellect be in service to it, the way that Einstein pointed to in that quote, if he actually said it, is amazing, right?
Oh,
so
absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Gary.
Yeah, thank you very much for this wonderful talk, Rohini. I mean, I'm wondering, how to understand what this other piece is about, right? I mean, the non-rational, the super rational, and whether what it, one of the ways to think about it is in terms of relationship and communication. I mean, the idea, and I'm not talking about communication as we do it, but transaction as a fundamental thing, that is that nature is fundamentally programmed to be cooperative and to be integrative. And our culture tells us, no, that's not the way it works. Everything is separate. Everything is on its own, everything is out for itself.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, that's the egotistical message, but that nature actually in reality is structured around cooperativity,
Mhm.
and around community, right? And integration.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering like whether that makes sense. I mean,
Makes
you know,
complete sense. Makes complete sense. And in non-dual spiritual teachings, basically it points to that we are all expressions of that one source. And so why wouldn't we work cooperatively together if we're all really part of that same one source, and that our natural state is peace and love and well-being, and it's just the illusion of our mind that takes us out of that natural state. So it makes complete sense that it's a cooperative experience, and that it looks like we're all separate, but that's only what we can perceive and see based on our five senses and what science can measure at this point in time. But what you're pointing to is that there's a deeper reality where the cooperation and the community and the working together just makes complete sense. Well, thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
Gary. Hey, William, I see hands raised now.
Hi, I just wanted to share that I'm really enjoying your presentation, and
Thank you.
these are very valuable insights that I think are practical, and I'm looking forward to the next part.
Okay, great. Did you have any questions about relationship that you'd like me to consider?
Well, I would love to hear perhaps how we could use rewilding, or, being less into programming perhaps,
Mhm.
to improve our relationships. I think that's an area where people really struggle, and there's a lot of suffering
Yeah.
because of communication issues and so on.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's got to be huge opportunities here for improvement.
Absolutely. Well, I'm happy to answer that, and that's right on point. I see a couple of hands raised. So Joy, should I talk about that and then come to you, or should I check in first? I know that I'm looking at the time as well, so I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I think we could, answer it here, or
Okay. And I think I can still get to you and Lawrence, if that's okay. Is that okay with you, Lawrence?
Yes.
Okay, great. So in terms of rewilding relationships, I mean, that's an area of great joy for me, mostly, well, not just because of the work that Angus and I do together with couples, but because this experience of rewilding within myself and within ourselves had a dramatic improvement on our relationship. And this is one of the ripple effects, right? Like the wolves in the park. I didn't think my relationship was in a dire way, but I also wasn't really expecting it to get much better. We'd been married for quite a long time at that point, and it's kind of like, well, I guess this is as good as it gets and I can make it work. But with that deeper experiential knowing that I'm fundamentally okay, even when I don't feel okay, which is that experiential knowing of that space of well-being that is beyond our emotional experience, beyond the thought storms that we have in the mind, that deeper relationship with that space within myself. What it did was it helped me to get more perspective so that I had less conditioning showing up in my relationship with Angus. And so one of the things that happened after I came home from that trip, where I had that insight about insecurity, I was in a really beautiful feeling inside of myself. He, on the other hand, had been looking after our two young daughters while I had been, in his mind, swanning off to do some retreat on some spiritual thing, the next thing that I'd gone into. And I come home and he was not a happy camper. He was angry. He was frustrated. He, was outside of his bandwidth. He was not balanced in that moment. And in his dysregulation, he said something to me, I can't remember what it was now, but something unkind. And every other time something like that had happened in our relationship, it impacted me. I would feel hurt by that statement. And so it always looked to me that his anger caused me suffering. And so for most of our relationship, I had been telling him, you need to fix your anger because I don't want to suffer this way. And so that was part of the tension that we had in our relationship, that I judged him as having a problem with his temper. And I felt that that caused me suffering. And so here I am coming home, the same interaction is happening, and I'm not feeling any pain whatsoever. Now, in that moment, it didn't even occur to me that I wasn't feeling any pain. This has occurred to me afterwards when I reflect back. But to him, he noticed that I wasn't behaving the same way, and that I didn't come back with either my angry retort or dissolve into tears, which had been one of the two ways that would typically go. And so then he said something else, to see if that was going to get me to respond in the way that I would normally respond. And still, it didn't impact me in the way that it had in the past, because I was so clear within myself that my conditioning wasn't jumping in. And he said to me, like, what's happening? Like, what's going on with you? Why don't you have a retort? And I said to him, and this was genuine, this is not manufactured, it was not a technique. I genuinely felt compassion for him in that moment. And I said, I can see you're suffering. And I can see that you're upset. And I know this isn't who you are. And when we talk about this, if he were here, he would say that in that moment, for the first time, just like for me, and the first time I had been in that experience without taking it personally and feeling hurt, for the first time, he was in that space of suffering. And he's not condoning his behavior. We want to be really clear that we're not condoning him saying something mean or unkind to me. But in that moment of his suffering, when that was the best he could do, he had never felt my compassion. He had never felt that I was able to see his suffering and have empathy for it. And that was a defining moment in our relationship. And that was when I started to see, like you're saying, William, the impact that this rewilding can have on relationships. Because what happens is when we are rewilded and more deeply connected with that space of love within ourselves, it gives us the capacity to not get gripped by our own misunderstandings in the same way. And so we then have less suffering independent of what our partner's doing. And it allows us to show up in ways that have more love and compassion and empathy within them in the relationship. And that creates a ripple effect of change. And my relationship with Angus has changed significantly over the years and has increased its depth and intimacy and understanding because of us both seeing the value of this. And so in that moment, the difference was that in the past, when Angus would have said whatever he said to me, what hurt me wasn't what he was saying. Every other time, what hurt me was what I was telling myself about myself. Mm-hmm. So I would hear him say that, and then I would think, oh my God, how can I be married to someone that treats me this way? What's wrong with me? I don't remember the exact content of my thinking, but it was along those lines. And that was what caused me so much pain, or I'm powerless, I can't do anything. Like all of that thinking that was not true was what was causing me the suffering. And that in my capacity to no longer be gripped by that, I was able to show up with much greater clarity in our relationship. And it drew out the best in Angus rather than the worst, because what we had been doing previously, even though we had managed to find a status quo at that point in time, it was not one where we're really both thriving. It was one where we were living more parallel, so that there was less suffering than we'd had previously when we were living less parallel and it felt like we needed to get divorced. And so we'd found this stability, but it wasn't a thriving, rich ecosystem of love, personal love. It was tolerable and it worked and it was good enough in my mind and in his mind at that time. But with the deepening of that space of safety within ourselves and the greater clarity, we could both, and he also had his own shifts within himself, we could both start to see the role of state of mind in our relationship, where when our mood would drop, we would be able to recognize when that was happening within ourselves, or perhaps if that was happening in our partner. And when our mood dropped, we would see how the quality of our thinking would become more distorted. It would become more about the historical conditioning of the past and less to do with what's really going on in the present moment. And being able to recognize and feel the difference between being caught up and being clear, that made such a tremendous difference in our relationship that we started to see this is what people can learn about how to navigate their relationship so there's less suffering. That when they understand that what's so helpful is to recognize the map of when we're caught up and when we're not. And it sounds so simple and it sounds so common sense and obvious, but we weren't seeing that. We were trusting our thinking when we were caught up and in the lack of clarity, and we were thinking that we needed to make decisions at that time and that we needed to have conversations at that time. And when we would have conversations at that time, they would be painful and we would say things that we would regret, or we would get discouraged and feel like we couldn't find an answer to something because we weren't able to see it at those times. And then what would happen is we'd get uncaught up. We would naturally restabilize, because that is what we're designed to do as human beings. We are designed to settle. We're designed to come back to our natural state. We would come back to our natural state and be open-hearted. And then all of a sudden, it's like the problem either wasn't a problem or the solution to the problem wasn't that difficult to figure out. And we would remember how much we loved each other and how much we cared about each other and how much we wanted to be together. And so simply understanding when we can trust our thinking and when we can't, and when we need to take care of ourselves because we're caught up and we're destabilized and our nervous system is dysregulated, versus when we're able to actually be in good communion with another human being. Like, these touch points were incredibly valuable for not just our relationship, but really for all relationships. It just tended to be that we played out the more volatile aspects in our personal relationship with each other, maybe with our kids at times. And so being able to see that primarily being in relationship with this deeper space within ourselves gives us a greater sense of safety and stability and clarity of mind, so that we can see people and situations with that clarity that also has the quality of an open heart. Clarity of mind also has the opening of the heart feeling to it. There's compassion, there's empathy, there's understanding. And that when I lose that, when I'm not in that experience, because believe you me, I'm not always in that experience, just knowing that I'm not there is valuable, because it means I do less damage in my life to my relationships and any other thing that I might get involved with. And it means that I know it's time to take care of myself and look at what I need in that moment to settle and to come back down to earth. And when we see the difference of how relationships look from clarity of mind and lack of clarity of mind, from clarity of mind, we see our partner clearly, we recognize why we fell in love with them, we see their good qualities, and we appreciate them, and we feel that open-hearted experience that we all enjoy. When we're caught up, we're in our own suffering. Just like when I was in that INS jail and I had that experience of going from deep distress to peace in that moment with exactly the same thing going on. I went from being really caught up in a low mood to having my mind settle, my nervous system settle, and getting clarity of mind and feeling the peace within my own heart. Well, the same thing happens in all kinds of situations. Day to day, we're going up and down in terms of our mood. That's just what happens to all of us as humans. We don't get to control that part of it. And so much effort is put on, how do I stay in a high mood? What do I do? And just like I was doing with all of that self-improvement earlier, that was putting so much pressure on me. It was ruining my state of mind and ruining my mood, because I was living with so much pressure on myself. So rather than trying to manufacture a good mood or force ourselves to be in a good mood, try to be in clarity all the time, we can take the pressure off of ourselves and trust the design of the system is for us to stabilize, and that all we need to know is where we are on that map of our own consciousness, and to be able to make decisions based on recognizing where we are. And that was a game changer in my marriage. And that's what we teach when we work with couples, to help them have less conflict, have less distance, have more intimacy in their relationships, by being able to see for themselves the value of resourcing themselves, the value of allowing themselves to be rewilded by their true nature, and then to recognize the difference when they're not in that state of mind, so that they can take different actions than they normally would, so that they can not get into the old habitual patterns. And I don't know if you're anything like Angus and myself, but when we're having a low mood conversation, it sounds pretty much the same as every other low mood conversation that we've had. When we're having a fight from that low mood place, we've pretty much had that same fight plenty of times. I think we've been married 28 years now. So we've revisited that fight in different ways over the years. And so just being able to see that shifts the dynamic and allows for there to be more experiences of goodwill and love and trust and rapport that builds the experience of love. Like, I can't remember who said that about we're designed to be in community, but that in Garrett, was it Gary, that in community, like that is what we're designed. We're designed to be cooperative. And when we're in our natural state, it's easy to be cooperative. But when we're caught up and we're in our fear, we're in our conditioning, we get self-centered, we get self-focused, and we're in pain and suffering. And when all we're trying to do is not have that, but the ways that we go about not having pain and suffering often create more pain and suffering for ourselves and often for other people. And so when we can come back to that inner resourcing within ourselves, we do less damage in our relationships with others, and we create more of a milieu and a container that is overflowing with love and understanding rather than being depleted with love and understanding. And when there's a richness of love and understanding in a relationship, we have so much more room for people's frailties, for their foibles, for their humanness. We're able to give them the benefit of the doubt so much more easily. And so for me, this experience of rewilding love within ourselves, that impersonal love, has the natural effect of benefiting relationships, because we come to relationships more resourced, but we also come to relationships with a reference point for when we're ourselves and when we're not ourselves, and that we can speak to that in our relationships, and that helps us to navigate them so much more smoothly. So I'll leave it there for now and just see if there's any follow-up questions to that piece on relationships. And I know Joy and Lawrence, you have your hands raised, so I'd like to give you time as well.
Yeah, beautiful shares, Rohini. Really, just learning more about our natural self and our true nature and living life a lot lighter, right? I have a question in the chat. It's
great.
She's asking, it seems that so many of us are seekers. Why is it so difficult to manifest our divinity?
Well, it's so interesting that, and I'll speak for myself in terms of my experience being a seeker, that my way of going about seeking was actually taking me further and further away from that natural state of love and well-being within myself, because I was not recognizing that what I was looking for was right here, right now. I thought I needed to be better. I thought I needed to improve myself. And so my seeking included this pressure component that was taking me deeper into the illusion of judgment, not having me come closer into the truth of what real love is. And so I think that that is so ingrained in so many of us that we forget to look and we forget to relax into that our natural state is love. Our natural state is our divinity, that there's nothing we need to do, earn, work for to get there, but there is a letting go of all of the misunderstandings that we bought into that tell us that's not true. And so for me, it's been a journey of waking up to that more and more, waking up to those blind spots and seeing that I am the only one. My thoughts are the only things that take me away from that experience of my true nature. And I do it innocently. But the more that I wake up to what really gets in the way, the easier it is to relax into experience in this moment, whatever it is, whatever my experience might be. And that's what I'm pointing to with the rewilding. It's like being open to experience as it is in this moment is what allows us to relax into the fullness of our experience and drop into that space that is beyond the level of just thought and feeling. And so it's a dropping into, it's a surrender, it's a letting go. And it's scary to do that. I can completely understand that. It's terrifying to think that we can let go and surrender and trust something that we don't even understand. But yet we do it all the time. We drop out of our intellect, we drop into that space within ourselves. And I think what's really helpful is to notice the ordinariness of this, right? We often have these highfalutin ideas about what it is to drop out of our intellect and into a peak spiritual experience. But I would encourage all of us to look at the ordinary day-to-day ways that we drop into that beautiful feeling inside of ourselves. Like I know for myself, I love going hiking with our dog. And on that hike, when I take him and I see how joyful he is, because we let him off leash and he runs around and I'm out there in nature, like I just drop into this feeling more often than not within myself when I'm on that experience. And that's ordinary. It's not special. It's something that I do most days. And to recognize that for yourselves, to respect that and to get eyes for that. Because I think so often when things feel ordinary, we don't really realize how profound they are and what they're pointing to and what they're revealing to us. And so to see the ordinary ways that divinity shows up, the ordinary ways that our true nature is right there in a moment, in a heartbeat, and how we can get pulled up and caught up in our thinking and feel like we're separate from it, but we're never separate from it. We just lose the experience and we can always come back to it.
That's so beautiful. So all we need to do is look within, like all the spiritual teachers have told us, right?
Yeah.
Really be mindful of your time. I see we're just about at the bottom of the hour. Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, I'm fine as long as everyone else is.
Okay.
So we going to Lawrence?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi there, Rohini. Nice to hear you talk. I want to approach this from a different angle, which would be a biological one. I've been reading about something allied to this in the book on sacred geometry by Robert Lawler. And he's talking about the inherent atomic change of every molecule of both living and inorganic substance, which changes entirely within 5 to 7 years. And yet it's not the genetic coding of the vehicle of replication and continuity is not dependent upon the genetic substance of which DNA is comprised, but it is the form of the helix that establishes the relationships of the cells that change continually. And so it's like it's a sacred geometry in nature that shapes our reality. So he's saying the architecture of bodily existence is determined by an invisible, immaterial world of pure form and geometry. And I'm just wondering, how does that interface with wilding?
Well, what I would say when I hear you share that, to me, that just points to that intelligence that is behind all of this, that there is this deeper intelligence that is guiding the expression of life on this planet, and that we can trust that intelligence and respect it. Even if I don't understand it, I can feel when I'm more in alignment with it and I've got less of my personal thinking on my mind, that feels very different than when I'm open to that.
And it's interesting that I think of this, that the caduceus is made up of helical spirals that, two legs of them that are continually interwoven. And that in itself is the sacred geometry within us.
Yeah.
That helps us to renew ourselves every 5 to 7 years. And yet sometimes we return to the way we were because we haven't changed our thinking.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That ability, I think what you're pointing to is there's that ability to open to possibility, and to the extent that we can, it's not really within our conscious control to, like, if I could say, get rid of my conditioning in this moment, I would absolutely do that, but that's not within my conscious control. But to know that it's possible, and I think to know that looking in that direction of our true nature, more gets revealed to us in terms of what is available to us in terms of healing and growth and learning and awakening, and that's the gift of this journey that we get, and we all get to see what we see along that journey. We all have our unique path that we're going to walk and open to, and I think that's beautiful when we're looking. I'm not that familiar with sacred geometry and those concepts, but I would say that it feels very aligned with everything that I'm pointing to, and just feel awed by that incredible intelligence that is behind everything.
True.
Thank you.
Thank you very
so
much.
Rohini. I see we're at the past our time, and I just want to give you a chance to, is there anything else you want to share with us about maybe how people get in touch with you, or any final closing thoughts?
Oh, thank you. Well, I want to say thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's so wonderful to meet new people and see some familiar faces and names as well. And it's such an honor for me to be in this conversation. I feel so grateful that I get to do this and get to be with like-minded people looking in this direction together. It feels like there's so much good that come from this. And I love learning about the organization that you've started and hearing about the vision. So it gives me a lot of hope and joy. And in terms of if anyone would like more information about my work, you can go to my website, which is rewilders.org. And we do have, Angus and I have a podcast called Rewilding Love. If you are interested in more of the relationship focused ramifications of being rewilded, that podcast speaks to that. And so thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you, Rohini. Just beautiful. I could just listen to you forever.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe a whole weekend, I think.
We will be seeing each other soon.
And then Susanna, did you have anything?
Yes, I just wanted to thank Rohini again and everybody for coming tonight, and the Richmond Central Virginia Ions community group and the rest of the team at Sanctuary of Earth. I'm so grateful to all of you for helping make this happen. And just a reminder to folks to please consider donating to this effort at sanctuaryoferarth.org/donate, and to also let you know what next month's speaker will be. Another wise person and teacher, Matthew Sanderson, talking about the fundamental aspects of a spiritual practice of today. He has a wide variety of practices that he taps into, and I really just wanted him, I guess more discussion out there in the Zoom world about just sort of the basics of spiritual practice. Like it seems like we kind of go on our own paths, and I think finding connecting themes and threads and practices like Rohini talked about tonight is really important for us to bring into our awareness and intentionality. So I think that's it for us. Thank you for allowing us to record this. We will be putting it on the Sanctuary of Earth website, so you could come back and watch it again and again. So Joy, you can have your wish and carry on this conversation all weekend. So thank you for staying a few minutes over, everybody. Thank you again, Rohini, and for everyone who tuned in tonight. We'll see you next month, and have a wonderful holiday season and winter solstice.
Yes. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you. Yay.
Bye. See you.
Excellent. Very
Happy
good.
holidays, everybody. Take
Thank
care.
you. Same to you.
Happy
Rohini.
holiday.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye now.